feeling is familiar. This slackening in the knees and ankles, coupled with a heaviness in my legs that won't let them move. My chest constricts. My breathing goes shallow. A gnawing in my gut, a ringing in my ear. In other words, my body is on high alert. Something is happening. I am not safe. But if you were to observe me in that moment, I'm pretty sure I would have appeared calm, collected, even happy or excited. Nothing external would likely betray the roiling feelings within me, but if you were to peel away my energetic facade, the picture would be very different. Did you know that you can climb to the top of the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral in London? I don't know if you still can, but 20 years ago you could. There's a stair. You start in the nave. There's a stair that takes you up to the drum of the dome. So you have the dome, and then you have the drum part, and then you have the church, right? So it takes you up to the drum, and then a stair that you climb around and around the drum, exiting out onto this little walkway, maybe 3 feet wide. And there's a stone balustrade that goes around, probably again 3 feet wide or 3 feet high. I see people leaning on it, sitting on it, taking their pictures. And we're, I don't know, 100 feet up or so, 150. But I'm feeling pretty safe there. I'm awed by the view, awed by the audacity of the construction. And then I find a little door to another set of stairs. And these lead to the top of the dome, or very nearly there. And there's a sign that notes that the stair is rather steep and narrow, which was a nice British understatement. See, these stairs wind between the inner and outer parts of the dome. If you know architectural work, the outer part of the dome and the inner part that you see from the nave looking up are two different structures. They're sandwiched. There's space between them. Bernini came up with that one, I think. So these stairs wind between the inner and outer parts of the dome, and they do become, rather claustrophobic. Near the apex, the rise of each step is about 18 inches, and the width is no more than that. If someone is coming down the stairs and you're going up, there's no way you're getting by each other. Plus, it's dark. They didn't add a lot of light in these spaces. So you step out of another small door into the light and wind of the city, and you're at the base of the cupola. So there's the dome, and there's the cupola that's on top, and you come out a little door in that cupola onto a much, much narrower path. Maybe 20 inches. Barely enough to stand there. And the barrier around that area isn't a nice, thick stone balustrade. It is more accurately described as a wrought iron fence, about 1 foot tall. I think of it more of a tripping hazard than any sort of safety thing. And so there you are, 360 some feet up in the air, looking at London on this little ledge with this little fence and nothing to stop your fall. To walk around that cupola one has to pass by others on that same little walkway. Forget politeness, although it didn't use the word forget, and slammed itself up against the cupola and made the other guy walk along the edge. And this is when my body's alarm systems are going off, and I remember, I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of falling. And friends, there's a difference. Many years ago, I was working with a team at my home church in Des Moines, Iowa. And we were struggling at that time with a bit of institutional and organizational change. It was a needed shift in governance structure that would formally change how the church operated. Needed because all the wisdom and research that we had access to at the time indicated that the capacity of its leadership was a limit on the church's growth. And you can get that, right? The capacity of the leadership is the limit to the growth of the church. So we had to expand the capacity, expand the leadership, do something else. And to do that, we needed to give up some long-held assumptions about how it all works. And of course, giving up those assumptions isn't easy to do. There's this gravitational pull of comfort that would have to be overcome first. The gravitational pull of comfort in your church. You know how it works. You know what happens every Sunday. It all looks pretty much the same week to week. And it's comfortable and comforting. Comfort with the way things are and our imaginings that the way things are that have served that comfort for so long were good enough. Why change? Why give up the control we thought we had? Anyway, into this conversation we were having, one wise voice rose. He said, "Friends, there is no human organization, no human system that can work without trust." It doesn't matter which system you're talking about. And the wisdom of that has echoed in my heart and mind ever since. Think of it. There are no political systems, I promise, that can work without trust. There's no democracy that can work without trust, of course. But there's also no dictatorship that could work without somebody trusting that guy. Right? There are no economic systems that work without trust. Even our money says, "In God we trust," but really, it isn't God that we have to trust when we hand that dollar over, is it? We have to trust that the person we hand the dollar to agrees on its value and offers us goods and services relevant to that value, right? Economic systems will collapse when enough people lose trust in them, and it doesn't matter which system it is. But trust doesn't just exist in these large human systems. It has to be present in our most intimate ones as well. Marriage is a trust. Parenting is trust. Friendship is trust. Trusting, particularly that when our knees go weak and our breathing shallows and we have that fear of falling, that someone will be there to catch us when we do, or better yet, grab our hand, look into our eyes, and remind us that we are safe, that I got you. It's been about 15 years ago, I first heard and read about this social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. And Jonathan Haidt has a theory he calls the moral foundations theory. And I've mentioned it here on various occasions, but I'm guessing you don't remember. I won't remember tomorrow that I mentioned it. But Let me remind or introduce you to this basic idea. Haidt's research asks on what basis we make moral decisions. And do we all share that same basis? Suspecting, of course, that we do not all share the same moral basis, and hence the so-called culture wars. He offers that we human beings have 5 areas, this is through his research, he's determined 5 areas through which we make moral decisions, or have, as he would say, moral intuitions. He's doubtful that we actually make moral decisions, by the way. We do it intuitively. There's a whole elephant thing involved in that. I won't get into it. So he notes these intuitions, or these areas of moral decision-making in pairs. And the best way I've always been able to describe how this works is if you think of the equalizer on your old stereo, right? So think of 5 knobs like that go up and down, right? And you can adjust the bass and the treble and the mid-range depending on what you want to listen to. So think of that. So there's care and harm, care being high, harm being low on that scale, right? Fairness and cheating, loyalty and betrayal, authority and subversion, sanctity and degradation. Those are the 5 that they've come up with. And they are open to other ideas, but they pretty much have worked those 5 out to be pretty true. And the idea is that we all fall on each of those continuums differently. And so in one of the interesting pieces of his works found that self-identified political liberals like me have care and harm and fairness and cheating cranked up on our equalizer. And the others are, down here somewhere. We just got those 2 cranked up. Political conservatives, however, tend to have more or less all of them cranked up. Which is interesting to think about when I engage in conversations with my politically conservative friends to realize that they're balancing morality on many more criteria than I do. I'm worried, did it hurt somebody? And is it fair? They're also working on 3 others that aren't that important to me. By the way, if you're interested, you can take an assessment online at yourmorals.org and see where you fall into that theory. But I want to focus a moment on this loyalty and betrayal foundation. And I have to confess, my assessment when I took the test, my assessment on loyalty scores, I think, almost the lowest. In other words, I don't use a sense of loyalty to measure as a measure of moral decisioning. I think part of this has to do with the way I see loyalty in operation in the world. Loyalty, at least the way I observe it, invoked in this culture, always seems to be one-sided. Loyal to country. But is the country loyal to me? My alma mater, the University of Illinois, when I was there, I learned the Illinois loyalty song. We're loyal to you, Illinois. We're orange and blue, Illinois. It's a wonderful song, if only for the line, for we know you have sand, Illinois. Sand? They were rhyming with land, and clearly not written by, the greatest lyricist ever. But even though I know that song, and I've spent a lot of money and time at the University of Illinois, I don't find that institution has a particular loyalty to me, except when they're asking for money. And I think, too, of a particular former president whose demand and expectation of loyalty is absolute, and who almost never, in fact never in my estimation, reciprocates. So for me, at least, loyalty occurs as something that is too one-way and rarely mutual. Loyalty too often, to me, I always have to say that, to me, seems unthinking and unreflective. There's no mutuality implied in loyalty. And you all are very welcome to disagree with me on that. That's okay. But for height, the other end of that loyalty scale is betrayal. But for me, the other end of betrayal is not loyalty, it's trust. Trust is much more challenging, I think, than loyalty, as anyone over the age of, one day would be able to tell you, maybe not the 2-day-old child, but I think we're born understanding trust and the betrayal of that. I'm hungry. I trust this person to feed me, except they're 5 minutes late. How could I possibly trust them again? This is why babies cry, by the way. Not really. Those whom we trust will at some point, intentionally, more often unintentionally, betray that trust. And how we negotiate that break in trust has everything to do with being in relationship with other human beings. Everything to do with our commitment to that transformative power of love. When someone is disloyal, I will concede, there is a similar break. But in that case, there's no demand and perhaps no way back to repair the relationship that is broken. In other words, when it's disloyalty, we can just write off the offender and end the relationship. But we can't do that with trust. It's a different thing. Trust has got to be mutual. You can't trust someone who doesn't trust you. I've tried a lot. It never works. Trust is relational. Broken trust demands repair. And if the repair isn't easy, by the way, you all know that. Repairing trust isn't easy. It takes time and patience and faith and commitment. It takes anger. It takes tears. And it always takes vulnerability. In our Mill Creek DNA, our values, beliefs, and mission, there's a section there that says this. It says, we embody openness, a courageous vulnerability that invites people to be known, to befriend, belong, and to become fully and vibrantly alive. Our openness is necessarily rooted in trust, in a willingness to participate in mutually accountable relationships. So what do we do when the trust is broken? When trust is lost? When trust is betrayed? First and foremost, we have to return to our covenants. Our covenants. These spoken covenants, written covenants, the unspoken ones too. The promises we have made with each other and to each other, and the promises we've made to ourselves. These agreements. Because, friends, if we are unwilling to return to those covenants, then there's no chance to repair that trust. I'm going to go to the side a little bit here. I'd written this in, deleted it. I'm going to go back to it. Over the last maybe 4 years, I know of, I think 3, and there may be 4 Unitarian Universalist ministers who have been disfellowshipped by the UUA. Out of the 4 cases, 3 of them lost their fellowship merely because they were unwilling to return to a covenant. It wasn't, they didn't hurt people, well, they did, but they didn't seriously injure people. They broke covenant, and they refused to come back. And so what do? It's not mutual, right? The covenant requires relationship. It requires mutuality. You have to come back, and that is why we've had to set the boundary and remove them from our fellowship. And it's heartbreaking. But if we're unwilling to return to our covenants, then there's no chance to repair trust. So, there are 3 easy ways to repair trust. I just said easy. I lied. Guess you don't trust me anymore. None of this is easy, but all of it is necessary. So the first thing to do when trust is broken is you have to acknowledge the break. Even when you think you didn't do it. You have to acknowledge the betrayal. You have to come together and reflect on and respond through where trust has been lost. Perhaps it is but perhaps it's just unrealized expectations. Maybe that's the break. Or perhaps it was a misunderstood or unskillful comment. I've made many of those in my life. Perhaps it was an injury, a physical injury, an emotional injury, a spiritual injury. But something broke, and when it did, trust was lost. And to regain that trust, we have to acknowledge the break. We all do. Not just the one who has felt it the most, but the one who wants to be in relationship with them. If it is me you have lost trust in, I have to be able to listen to your story and acknowledge that loss of trust, even if I didn't intend it. And that requires my commitment to the relationship be stronger than my commitment to being right. And man, I love being right. So it requires me to be vulnerable enough to be wrong, but hold on to the relationship. Second step, make amends. Make amends. Do the thing that is necessary to repair the break, and you don't know what that is. You have to ask. You have to ask one another. Guess what? You still have to be in a relationship, right? So if you're going to be in a relationship, you have to ask the question, how can I make amends? How can I repair this? And it's a long road, friends, this amends making. Because in most cases, there's not just one thing. No magic wand, no, fix that. We're back together. And in most cases, I have found it is not even a doing thing, but a being thing. We must find ways of being that repair, of being attentive to the relationship and being intentional about trusting again. And the third thing, the third part of this, is to know that that mended part is fragile. And you know this. You've fixed things in your lives, fixed your grandmother's china cup that broke, fixed other things in your life. And when we glue or tape or sew those broken pieces back together, that's the most likely place it's going to break again. Unless apparently you use Gorilla Glue. But here's the thing. When you make the joint stronger, when you make the repair stronger than the rest, then the rest is the fragile part. Honor that fragility. That's the vulnerability in your relationships. Many of you, particularly those of you who have joined the church over these last several years, have heard me talk about the community of this church as a net. As a net. The net of community that is there to catch us when we fall. And we will fall. We fall all the time. A loved one dies, and we fall. We lose a job, and we fall. We say goodbye to a friend. We fall. We fall in love. We fall out of love. We fall apart. We fall from grace. We fall to our knees. And I believe that it is this net of community that can catch us as we fall. But here's the thing about the net. We have a responsibility. We all have that responsibility to weave the net. It doesn't just exist on its own. Each of us have a responsibility to weave the net if we expect it to be there when we fall, when we need it. We have a responsibility to hold those edges tight, and we have a responsibility to mend the tears, the gaps, and to work to ever strengthen that net if we have any hope of it catching us when we fall. Strengthen. Strengthen the net. Strengthen. In the etymology of the word trust, I learned that our word trust comes from an old Norse term, trauster, meaning strength. The net is strong only when we trust ourselves and each other to have made it so. I was talking once with a friend who had done more than a dozen skydiving jumps out of, as we say, perfectly good airplanes. And I told him that given my abject fear of falling, I didn't think I could ever convince my body to step into that particular void, reminding myself of being frozen on the top of St. Paul's Dome, which, by the way, is a much shorter fall than skydiving. Just mentioning it. My friend smiled at me, and he said, "You know, Greg, that fear of falling never goes away. But that eventually you let the wholeness of your life trust." I love how he said that. The wholeness of your life trust. Trust your training. Trust the certainty of gravity. And trust the parachute will catch you as you fall. And then he said this. He said, then you learn over time the vulnerability of that trust. And that vulnerability is the only way into love. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live this blessing.